The year was 1865, and Arizona Territory was a place where men gambled their lives as often as their coins. Dust hung thick in the air that morning, as though the desert itself had decided to choke every living soul that dared to cross it. A lone rider pushed through that haze, his horse little more than a shadow on the horizon. The beast's ribs pressed sharp against its hide, and the man's own face mirrored that same hollow hunger, jaw tight, eyes sunken, beard untrimmed from weeks of weariness. His name was Caleb Turner. A rancher once, though his land had dried to dust and his cattle had long been claimed by raiders and wolves. All he had left was the horse beneath him, a stubborn bay with a limp in its right foreleg and a will that had outlasted Caleb's hope more than once. Caleb's boots were cracked, his hat frayed at the brim, and yet he kept riding toward the crooked outline of the Willow Creek trading post. The air smelled of smoke as he neared. Not the kind of smoke from a ranch fire, but the rough, stinging kind that clung to gamblers, drifters, and whiskey men. The post squatted low against the land, its boards warped from sun and storm alike. Caleb swung out of the saddle, his boots striking dust. His hand lingered on the horse's reins, knowing full well he might have to trade the animal to eat. The thought hollowed his chest. Inside, the room was thick with voices. Men leaned against the bar, their hats shadowing eyes that measured every stranger as a threat. Cards slapped tables, coins clinked, whiskey spilled. Caleb stepped forward slow, the air prickling on his neck. He'd walked into enough rooms like this to know that one wrong move could send the whole place bristling. Then came the sound, sharp, desperate, a girl's cry. Caleb turned, and there she was. She couldn't have been more than 15. Skin bronzed by the sun, hair black as crow feathers, tangled and wild around her face. Her dress was torn, one shoulder bare, dirt streaking her arms. She stumbled into the post like a deer that had run too far and too fast, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. The men nearest her grinned, like wolves. One shoved away from the table. "Look what wandered in," he drawled. "Little Apache bird, all alone." Another man rose, broader, meaner, scar along his jaw. "She'll fetch good coin if we ride her back to the fort. Soldiers pay well for their runaways." The girl backed up, pressing herself against the wall. She shook her head, muttering words in her tongue Caleb couldn't understand. Fear was written clear enough in her eyes. Caleb felt the weight of his revolver at his side. He also felt the weight of hunger in his belly, the hollow of his pockets, and the certain knowledge that stepping into this meant trouble he couldn't afford. He should have turned away, should have let fate take her where it would, but he didn't. The scar-jawed man grabbed the girl by the arm, yanking her forward. She cried out again, a sound sharp enough to slice through Caleb's chest. He heard his own wife scream in it, long buried, never forgotten. Before he could stop himself, Caleb spoke. "Let her go." The room quieted. Cards paused midair. Whiskey glasses froze halfway to lips. Every head turned his way. Scarjaw sneered. "You buying her then, cowboy? She ain't free." The words tasted like ash, but Caleb forced them out. "I'll trade." A laugh rippled around the room. "Trade what?" Scarjaw mocked. Caleb's hand tightened on his horse's reins. He looked at the bay through the open doorway, the animal's dark eyes on him as though it knew what was coming. The last piece of his life. The only thing that had carried him this far. "My horse," Caleb said. His throat worked. "She goes free for my horse." For a moment, silence held. Then Scarjaw's grin split wide. "Done." Caleb stepped forward, shoved the reins into the man's hand. The girl was thrust at him in exchange. Her small frame collided with his chest, trembling like a leaf. Behind him, his horse whinnied once, confused, then was led away into the dust. Caleb didn't look back. He couldn't. They walked out into the fading light, the desert wind pulling at their clothes. Caleb's boots dragged, and the girl trailed silent beside him, bare feet scuffing the earth. He didn't know her name, didn't know if she understood him. But she followed, and that was enough for now. By sundown, the world was painted in blood and gold. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries sharp, hungry. Caleb built a small fire with what scrub he could find, the flames snapping weak against the chill. The girl sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, watching him with eyes that never blinked. He broke a piece of dried bread from his satchel, handed it across. She hesitated, then snatched it quick, eating like she hadn't seen food in days. Caleb looked away, guilt pressing heavy. He hadn't saved her out of nobility. He'd done it because her scream had torn something open inside him, something he'd buried with his wife and boy when fever took them. Her voice came soft after a while, words in broken English. "You trade horse. For me." Caleb nodded once. Seemed the right thing. She shook her head. "No man do that. Not white man." He said nothing. The fire cracked, throwing shadows across her face. For the first time, he saw more than fear in her eyes. He saw grief. Deep, sharp grief. The kind a child shouldn't have carried. She told him, halting, that soldiers had raided her people. Her mother cut down. Her brother taken. She had run, but only barely. Caleb stared into the flames, jaw clenched. Loss was a language he understood. The night deepened, the air turning sharp. Caleb shifted, laying his revolver across his lap. The girl followed his gaze when he looked up, eyes narrowing. Hoofbeats, distant, faint but growing. He rose to his feet. The girl's breath hitched, her hands gripping the dirt. Caleb scanned the dark horizon, the fire's glow blinding his night vision. Shadows moved, men on horseback circling. They followed, he muttered. His hand tightened on the revolver. Damn fools couldn't leave well enough alone. Gunfire cracked. The ground spat, dust near his boots. Caleb shoved the girl behind him, firing into the dark. A rider tumbled with a curse. Horses screamed. Hooves thundered. "Run!" Caleb barked. The girl scrambled, clutching his arm instead of fleeing. Bullets whined past. Caleb dropped behind a rock, returning fire. His old revolver barked once, twice, smoke stinging his eyes. Another man fell, but there were more, always more. The night turned into chaos. Shouts in the dark. Gunpowder thick in the air. Caleb's heart hammered like a drum. He shoved the girl low, crawling through brush, their breaths ragged. A bullet split a branch above his head, showering them in splinters. He rolled, fired blind, heard the grunt of a man falling. Another charged close, knife flashing. Caleb swung the revolver like a club, cracked the man's jaw. The girl screamed, clutching his coat as he shoved the body aside. They ran, stumbling over rocks, the world spinning with gunfire and hoofbeats. Caleb's legs burned, lungs on fire. He half carried the girl, half dragged her. Behind them, curses grew fainter, but not gone. At last, the land dipped into a dry wash. Caleb collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, revolver trembling in his hand. The girl crouched beside him, her small hands pressing against his arm as though to steady him. Her eyes wide, glistening but unbroken. For a long while, they just breathed. Coyotes howled again, closer now. Caleb's hand slipped, the revolver clattering to the dirt. Darkness pressed in. His body gave out, dropping heavy. The last thing he felt was the girl's hands on him, gentle, steady. He thought, hazily, that he'd lost everything tonight. His horse, his strength, maybe even his chance at seeing the next sunrise. But he was wrong. Through the blur of his failing vision, he saw lights flicker on the ridge. Not torches of drifters, not soldiers. The shapes of riders, many riders cut against the stars. The girl gasped, whispering a word in her language, almost reverent. Caleb's head fell back. His last thought before darkness swallowed him was simple, terrifying, and strange. Were they here to kill him or save him? The first light of dawn struck Caleb's eyelids, dragging him back from the pit of exhaustion. His body ached as though beaten with iron, every bone screaming its protest. He blinked hard, sand caking his lashes, and the world came into view. Harsh desert glare, shadows moving above. Not shadows, riders. A dozen, at least, dark figures on horses circling the wash where he and the girl had collapsed. The girl crouched beside him, hands clenched in her lap, eyes wide but not afraid. No, there was recognition there, something close to relief. Arrows notched, bows drawn, spears leveled. Apache warriors, their faces painted in black and red, feathers trailing in the wind, eyes hard as flint. Caleb's throat went dry. He tried to rise, his hand fumbling for the revolver lying in the dirt. Before he could touch it, a boot kicked it aside. A warrior leaned down from his mount, teeth bared. His words cut sharp in Apache tongue. Caleb caught only fragments. Threats. Accusations. The girl leapt up, hands raised, speaking fast, her voice desperate. She pointed to Caleb, then to herself, her words tumbling over one another. The warriors stilled, listening. The leader, a broad man with a hawk feather in his hair, glared at Caleb as though weighing whether to strike him dead where he lay. Caleb forced his voice steady, though fear clawed at his throat. "I mean no harm." She was in trouble. A spear but slammed into his chest, knocking the wind from him. He coughed, clutching the dirt, the taste of blood in his mouth. The hawk-feathered leader barked an order. 2 warriors dismounted, seizing Caleb's arms, dragging him upright like a rag doll. The girl cried out again, this time louder, pointing back toward the desert. Caleb caught one word repeated, horse. She was telling them what he'd done, that he'd given up his horse for her life. The warriors exchanged glances, suspicion written plain across their faces. The leader studied him long, eyes dark as coal. Then, with a sharp gesture, he ordered them to bring Caleb. The last thing Caleb saw before they bound his hands was the girl's face, pleading, insistent, unbroken. They dragged him through miles of dust and thorn until the land opened into a canyon camp. Smoke curled from fires. Women moved like shadows among the shelters. Children clung close, eyes watching him with fear and hate. Caleb was shoved into the center, wrists bound, knees striking hard dirt. The warriors formed a circle around him, the girl at their side, speaking quick, urgent words. He couldn't understand most, but he caught the way her voice cracked on certain names, her mother, her brother. The tribe murmured at that. The chief, older than the hawk-feathered leader, stepped forward. His hair was streaked with gray, his face cut deep with lines. Authority radiated from him like the sun itself. His gaze lingered on Caleb a long time before he spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Why would you trade your horse?" the chief asked in halting English. "For this girl?" Caleb swallowed, his mouth dry as sand. Every eye bore into him. He could have lied, spun a tale, but truth was all he had left. "I heard her cry," he said. His voice rasped, sounded like my wife the day she died. I couldn't stand by. A murmur rippled through the circle. Some faces softened, others hardened. The hawk-feathered leader spat at Caleb's boots, growling in Apache. The girl answered, voice rising. The chief raised a hand. Silence fell. He studied Caleb again, then pointed at the fire. "Sit, eat, then we decide." They cut his bonds but left him under guard. Caleb lowered himself beside the flames, every muscle screaming. A woman passed him a strip of venison, her face blank. He chewed slowly, the meat tough but real, the first he'd eaten in days. Across the fire, the girl sat close to the chief, speaking in soft tones. Night crept in, shadows growing long. Caleb listened to the tribe's voices, words he didn't understand but whose meaning carried in tone, anger, grief, suspicion. Some wanted his blood spilled. Others seemed less sure. He stared into the flames, remembering his boy's face, pale with fever. His wife's hand slipping from his. He had thought himself emptied of all things that mattered. But here, by this fire, with a girl he barely knew pleading for his life, something stirred again. The decision came swift. The chief stood, his words ringing out. The hawk-feathered leader argued, fists clenched. The girl shouted back, her voice sharp as flint. Then the sound cut through them all, gunfire. A cry from the edge of camp. Horses screamed. The night exploded with chaos. Men poured from the shadows. Drifters, the same ones Caleb had seen at the trading post, now joined by soldiers in filthy blue coats. Their rifles spat fire, their whoops and curses tearing the night apart. The Apache warriors surged to meet them, arrows loosed, war cries rising. Caleb scrambled to his feet, hand fumbling for a weapon. A rifle clattered to the dirt nearby, dropped from a fallen warrior. He snatched it up, the wood rough in his grip, the iron cool. Shots cracked. A soldier staggered, blood spraying. Caleb ducked behind a wagon, breath coming ragged. The girl screamed somewhere in the fray. He saw her, darting toward shelter, 2 raiders closing in. Caleb raised the rifle, fired once, the recoil smashing his shoulder. One man dropped, the other turned, rage twisting his face, charging with knife drawn. Caleb swung the rifle, but hard. Bone crunched. The raider collapsed, gurgling. The hawk-feathered leader fought like a storm, blade flashing, arrows splitting the dark. For a moment, Caleb thought the man might cut him down too, but then he saw the warrior was fighting beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Their eyes met in that chaos. No words passed, but something shifted between them. The battle raged. Horses trampled. Women wailed. Fire spread from a burning wagon, smoke choking the air. Caleb coughed, eye stinging, vision swimming. He fired until the rifle clicked empty, then swung it like a club, every strike fueled by desperation. At last, silence fell, broken only by moans of the dying. The raiders lay scattered, broken. A few survivors fled into the night, horses carrying them away like ghosts. Caleb collapsed against a rock, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. His hands shook, the rifle slick, with blood not all his own. The girl stumbled to him, clutching his arm. Her eyes glistened, but she was alive. The chief stood tall, in the smoky dawn, his people gathering around. He looked at Caleb long, then spoke to his warriors. Murmurs rippled. Some nodded, others scowled, but none raised a hand against him. The hawk-feathered leader approached, blood streaking his chest, eyes still sharp but softened. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, firm, acknowledging. The girl whispered in Caleb's ear, her words trembling but sure. "Now you are part of us." Caleb stared at the fire's dying embers, at the tribe who had nearly killed him, now standing as one with him. He had given up his horse. He had bled beside them. And in the heat of battle, something had shifted. The chief's voice rang out once more, strong and final. He looked at Caleb, his eyes like stone. "By dawn we ride together." Caleb felt the weight of those words settle on him like armor. He had nothing left in the world, yet somehow here, in the heart of strangers, he had found the start of something new. And dawn was coming fast. The night cracked open with gunfire. Daniel woke to the shrill echo of a rifle, the sound tearing through the canyon walls like lightning through a storm sky. His hand shot to his Colt before his eyes had fully opened. Across the fire, the Apache girl stirred, eyes wide, hair unbound, face pale in the glow of the embers. The tribe had been camped near them, scouts had gone out, warriors had taken posts, but this was different. This wasn't an attack from wild animals or a lone drifter. This was men, armed men. Shadows moved at the edge of the firelight, rifles flashing. The horses screamed in terror, their hobbled legs straining as gunshots cracked closer. Daniel rolled, firing into the dark. A cry went up. Someone fell, but more came forward, relentless, driving in with pistols and shotguns. He grabbed the girl by the arm. "Run!" She shook her head. Pointing, her tribe was forming, warriors mounting bareback, arrows already knocked. The ground trembled with their response, the war cries cutting through the night, like the howl of wolves. Daniel realized then this wasn't just a raid. It was a full-blown assault meant to wipe them out. He fired again, the recoil jolting through his arm, the flash burning his eyes. Beside him, the girl pulled a small blade from her belt, crouched low, her teeth clenched. She was no longer a frightened child of the desert. She was a warrior's kin. The battle raged in a blur. Bullets whined overhead, arrows hissed, men fell screaming. The air filled with the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood. Daniel moved like a man possessed, firing, reloading, ducking, dragging the girl behind cover, his mind locked on survival. Every moment felt like it might be his last. Then came a shout, a name. McGraw. The voice rang out through the chaos, cutting clear above the noise. Daniel froze. The Colt aimed at nothing for a half-breath. Few men knew his name anymore. He'd buried it, just as he'd buried his past. Out of the smoke, a figure stepped broad-shouldered, hat low, a scar cutting across his cheek like a canyon. Daniel's chest tightened. Amos Cutter, a ghost from the war. A man Daniel had once ridden with, fought beside, and betrayed. Or maybe Amos had betrayed him. The memory was muddied with blood and whiskey, but the hatred was clear in Cutter's eyes. "You should have stayed dead," Amos spat, raising his shotgun. The blast roared. Daniel dove, dirt kicking up where his chest had been. He rolled, fired, missed. Amos cursed, advancing through the chaos like the devil himself had sent him. Daniel scrambled, pulling the girl with him, heart pounding so hard it threatened to burst. The tribe was holding, for now, but Amos Cutter brought men, and men brought death. If Daniel fell here, the girl would too. He fired again, grazing Amos's arm. The outlaw snarled, the shotgun slipping from his grip. For a moment, their eyes locked, the firelight flickering between them, history bleeding into the present. Daniel thought of all the years he'd spent running, all the nights haunted by faces he'd left behind. It had led to this. The Apache chief's voice broke the spell, calling Daniel's name, not McGraw, but the new one they had given him, one meaning brother. The tribe rallied, charging with spears and tomahawks, driving Cutter's men back into the dark. Amos cursed, retreating, his promise burning on the wind. "This ain't over, McGraw." And then he was gone. Daniel stood shaking, Colt heavy in his hand, the girl clutching his arm. He knew Cutter spoke true. It wasn't over. The night stilled, save for the moans of the wounded and the sobs of the living. The tribe gathered their dead, laying them in silence beneath the stars. Daniel sat apart, staring at the fire. The girl pressed close. He had given up his horse once. Now he had given up his peace, and the frontier would demand more. By dawn, the tribe rode. The sky was painted with streaks of crimson and gold, as if the heavens themselves bled for the fallen. Warriors mounted their ponies, faces painted, weapons ready. Women tied supplies to packs, children clung to mothers. The air hummed with the weight of vengeance and survival. Daniel mounted a borrowed horse, the girl seated behind him. He thought he was done with war, done with blood, but war had found him again, and this time he rode not for a flag or a cause, but for a promise. He had stood with the tribe. He would not abandon them now. They rode fast, the thunder of hooves echoing across the desert. Dust rose in great clouds behind them. Ahead, the land stretched wide and unforgiving, canyons, rivers, scrubland that swallowed the careless whole. Cutter's men would follow. Daniel knew it in his bones. By midday, the riders slowed. The chief raised a hand, signaling halt. Scouts reported smoke on the horizon, Cutter's camp. Too many men to face outright, but not enough to stop the Apaches if they struck fast, struck true. The plan was set. A strike at dusk, surprise their enemy, scatter them, leave Cutter with nothing but ashes. Daniel checked his Colt, fingers steady despite the storm in his chest. The girl touched his hand, eyes fierce, unafraid. In that moment, he realized what had changed. He was no longer running for himself. He was standing for someone else, for people who had taken him in, trusted him, called him brother. The sun sank. The riders moved. They swept down the ridge like a storm unleashed, arrows singing, rifles cracking. Cutter's camp erupted in chaos, men shouting, scrambling for guns. Daniel fired, reloaded, fired again. A man lunged with a knife. Daniel caught his wrist, twisted, drove him into the dirt. Another charged with a shotgun. An arrow dropped him before he pulled the trigger. Through the smoke, Daniel saw Amos Cutter. The outlaw stood in the center of the fray, revolvers blazing, eyes locked on Daniel like death had chosen its mark. Daniel spurred his horse forward, the girl clinging tight. Cutter roared, lifting his gun. The world narrowed. Just Cutter. Just Daniel. The first shot grazed Daniel's shoulder. He barely felt it. He fired back, missing wide. Cutter laughed, a sound that curdled blood. They closed the distance, gunfire sparking around them, horses screaming, warriors falling. Daniel dismounted, rolling into the dirt. Cutter advanced, gun steady, every step deliberate. "You should have stayed in the grave," Amos growled. Daniel's Colt clicked empty. His chest tightened. He thought of the war, of betrayal, of the horse he'd given away and the girl he'd saved, of the tribe who rode for him now. And then he charged. The two men collided, fists flying, guns tumbling into the dust. Cutter was strong, brutal, his hands closing around Daniel's throat. Spots danced in Daniel's vision. His lungs screamed. The girl cried out. A flash of steel. She drove her knife into Cutter's side. The outlaw staggered, eyes wide with shock. Daniel wrenched free, grabbed his fallen Colt, and fired point-blank. Cutter dropped, the dust rising around him like a final shroud. Silence fell. The tribe stood victorious, the camp in ruins, Cutter's men scattered or dead. Daniel sat trembling, the Colt slipping from his grip, the girl pressed against him. For a long moment he could not speak. When at last he did, his voice was low. "It's over." But the chief shook his head, his voice solemn. "No, brother, it has only begun." The frontier stretched before them, vast, endless, unforgiving. Daniel knew he could not turn back, could not return to the life he'd left. He had chosen his place, and the tribe had chosen him. He looked at the girl, her eyes fierce with the fire of survival, and felt the weight of it settle deep in his chest. He had given his last horse, his last peace, his last chance at solitude. But in return, he had found something more. And that was how the frontier marked its men, not by what they kept, but by what they gave.